In terms of my quote unquote other team, team I secretly support, according to a lot of people, Arsenal. I've seen some reports in the last few days of Rodrygo being on the agenda again this January. What's the likelihood of that and or other business for Arsenal as far as you're aware at this particular moment, Ben?
Well, I think Arsenal are not necessarily going to be as busy as others in the January period because Andrea Berta did a big revamp over the summer. But like Chelsea, they'll be opportunistic. And I think that word is key with Andrea Berta because he definitely doesn't turn down a deal if he thinks it's right for the football club, even if he's to bring it forwards to mid-season. But I do think from the perspective of Arsenal, they did in several positions enough of a revamp, and the fact that they're doing well and that they have consistency at the moment. So barring a injury, there isn't as much for Arsenal to do as potentially other clubs. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to do nothing. We know that the key positions that they'll look at is still in the long run some form of starting left winger, but contingent potentially on Gabriel Martinelli or Leandro Trossard leaving, which is why, as I said earlier in the show, summer 2026 might be the time to watch. And then you still got Eze, who if needed could float left. And you got Noni Madueke, who was signed and told really explicitly that he'll be able to switch sides. So he'll get opportunities even when Bukayo Saka starts. And unfortunately, Madueke picked up an injury, but prior to that, he looked very promising for both club and country. So Arsenal are quite calm about the left side, but it still could be something that they look at if there's an outgoing in 2026. Some are likely unless the right opportunity presents itself mid-season, and maybe there's an outgoing as well. So let's see, for example, whether Saudi finally get their act together and try and bid for either Gabriel Martinelli or Leandro Trossard. And if, of course, any of those two want to go there. And I think it's difficult because one, it's mid-season, two, it's a World Cup year. So this is why we might not see much movement as far as Arsenal outgoings are concerned, which again will affect what they do in January. And the other area is still, I'm told, a number 9, not a starter like a Victor Gyökeres, likely a younger kind of player, but there remains a question mark in 2026 over Gabriel Jesus. When it's not Victor Gyökeres, it's obvious Mikel Merino seems to be next in line, and he's still a bit of a makeshift number 9, even though he's played there quite a lot for Arsenal and has done very well. So there's room for Arsenal in the next calendar year to look at more of a young target. And I've mentioned Etta Young being the kind of profile that several Premier League clubs, including Arsenal, like. Some compare him to the next Erling Haaland. The player himself believes he's more in the mould of a Harry Kane. And I'm not saying for Arsenal it will be Etta Young, because you've got Barcelona, Real Madrid, Manchester United, even Chelsea and several others all looking at the player for the summer, because he's played for Villarreal and Levante, so he can't play for a third team within this season. But that is the kind of age, that is the kind of profile, that's the kind of physicality, that's the kind of target man that I think ticks a lot of boxes for Arsenal. Whether it's a young, specifically a player that they've scouted, remains to be seen because it's very early stages. But that's an area I think that Arsenal will look at. And it won't necessarily be an out-and-out starter, because if things are going well with Victor Gyökeres, then of course he'll be the main man. But it could well be another young number 9, especially if Gabby Jesus goes.
Yeah, that's a real interesting one. I think Arsenal a little bit like the situation with Chelsea. I feel like the squad is really good. It's going to obviously be tested in the coming few weeks with Gabriel having this injury now that he's got and everything else. But yeah, is that on big up, by the way, Hand of Arsenal in the chat. Obviously a really big X account and everything else. Glad to see you here, my friend. Thank you very much for joining us over on in the YouTube community. That means a great deal. A few people in the comments in relation to Arsenal are asking about Yildiz. Is that anything that you're aware of at this particular moment?
Yeah, I've seen the stories, not too much to add at this stage. I think once again, you have to understand the difference in strategic approach now compared to under Edu. And I think Mikel Arteta and Edu were sort of extensions of each other to some extent, and that's why they work really well together. Andrea Berta's come in and is benefiting from the excellent project that was built, including, let's not forget, a number of high-profile renewals. But his mentality, his job description is win now. Whereas Edu and Arteta were kind of told together, and we should credit Jason Ato as well, to build something over 4 or 5 years. Berta sees enough evidence that those foundations are in place. So he's going to be, I think, more opportunistic and aggressive in the market. And if he thinks a player, whether January or the summer, will make the difference to this project, then he'll push and maybe be a bit more short-termist and go up to his board and ask for a little bit more money, because it is about Arsenal getting an instant return. And there's 2 junctures to do that. One is midway through the season, where they have to assess, are we on track? And if you are, sometimes stability is best. Or do we need one more in a certain position due to how the team is playing and its chemistry, or potentially injuries? And then I think Berta is the kind of character, we saw this at Atletico Madrid as well, to push for it and be quite demanding, because there's a very positive sort of maverick streak to how he works in the market. And then you come to summer and it's different, because we'll know by summer, have they won something or have they just missed out? And that will also inform how Berta works in the market. But I think it's just really important to stress, because everyone thinks, who are we going to sign? That's what we get excited about. But Berta will be looking and saying, is this squad chemistry good enough to win something and get a return on this project? And that will include things like the extensions that he's been a part of, and obviously prior to his time, getting Bukayo Saka to sign over the line, getting Noni Madueke fit, maybe giving him some time on the left-hand side. That will inform how they approach things. Victor Gyökeres coming back from injury, and how does he cope during the festive period? So Berta won't be afraid, and I don't mean this as in panic buying, so I want to be clear, but Berta is not afraid to make last-minute decisions. And there's a big difference between a panic buy where you go, yikes, we need something unplanned for, or we've missed out on a target and now we've just got to do something, and a last-minute decision, which is actually something that's very measured, where you trust your list of potential targets, but you don't make the decision until maybe January the 1st, because what you want to know is what's going to happen during the festive period. And if Arsenal keep going as they are, then I don't think Mikel Arteta or Andrea Berta will necessarily want to rock the boat. And that's why they might be patient in the market.
Listen, I get that approach, and it makes a lot of sense. We spoke about this maybe 30 minutes ago about, maybe there's a knock-on effect if a Liverpool make a big signing and Liverpool are breathing down their necks, or City make a big signing and they're breathing down their necks. There could be an injury that happens that moves things along, but clubs need to get this decision-making right, as you say. When is the right time to add players in? Will they get the game time? Is it a number one target? Is there a better player we can get in the summer, as an example? And, I know Arsenal fans would have loved to have signed some players last January, but there is the potential that you could have spent some of your summer's money on players last January. They not quite work out, and then you don't have the summer that you just had. So I know football fans, everything's about the here and now. What, a quote the great Eddie Murphy, what have you done for me lately? Everything's about today. But sometimes you have to be, as you say, a little bit more calculated, a little bit more measured, and not panic. And I think that with Berta at Arsenal, I've certainly seen it as an outsider, and I know Arsenal fans feel it. You can tell by the way they behave. I think they feel really comfortable with that element of the running of their football club right now. So even if they don't buy, I think they'll know, well, there's a reason for that. The summer's going to be good. The right targets will come in. So it's going to be an interesting time indeed. It really is. Any questions from the viewers that have come in here in the last few minutes? Not really. A lot of comments. A lot of people just shouting Berta. A few people are calling me out actually for not pulling you up on saying net spend, because I'm a big advocate that net spend isn't real at football clubs. But I'll be honest with the viewers here. Ben's here to just give us information. He's speaking. We're not here having a footballing debate. I'm not pulling Ben up on things like that. Equally, I wouldn't. Like, it is what it is. But Ben also understands that net spend, in the basic sense the newspapers publish it in, is not how clubs operate. He understands real profit and loss. So I don't need to pull Ben up on it. He just used that term. I'm getting loads of stick for it. Like, Terry, you didn't say anything. Like, I'm not here to shout down everything everybody says. And it's not a debate
I
going
think
that way. But yeah, sorry.
the net spend is still a really interesting and important metric. And obviously, when you bring in money, that money also reflects on your short-term accounts as an annual number. And if you spend a much larger number, such as Liverpool's reported 450 million, including add-ons, then that's amortized. So this is the point around the new financial rules, that as we move towards squad cost control measures similar to UEFA, the clubs that have that amortization, even if it's been a big outlay over up to 5 years, will find when we enter the new rules from 2026, 2027, that they've got more rope to work with. So there is a logic as PSR fades out to spend, if your revenue warrants it, a big number, amortize it, because you know that you can basically make more losses than just the 105 number. And then in the short term, if you need to balance your books, the money that you bring in reflects annually and very positively on the accounts.
Yeah.
So this is what's fascinating, that, and obviously I'll explain this more when I get off this, because I was breaking that story and now I'll write it up and digest it. But the key headline is not just a change to squad cost control measures, it's the fact that anchoring had insufficient support. So at the moment, there's no top to bottom cap. We'll have to wait and see whether anybody suggests some form of cap. But at the moment, there is no cap. There is no anchoring.
Yeah.
So if you earn $1 billion in revenue, then you've got 85% of that to put towards things like transfers and agent fees without a cap. And I think the only thing that's restrictive is the fact that clubs that are playing in Europe will still, to my knowledge, have to abide by financial fair play as well. So if they willy-nilly hit that 85% number and they're in Europe, they have to also respect what at the moment is a 70% number. And that kind of is the cap in many ways.
Yes.
If you're a newly promoted side, you can hit 85% and not worry about the 70. And if you're Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, if they get back into Europe, you have to worry about the 85 and the 70.
Which is,
so
yeah,
it's a balancing act.
I agree, which is the truth prevails there. So net spend is real. Again, there's an element of net spend that holds water. The issue that I always push back against is that you shouldn't be using it as your ultimate barometer. The reason being is Man United this summer are probably going to see Maguire, Casemiro, Sancho, and Rashford go. That's £1 million a week in salary that's being saved. So you're there talking about £52 million back into the business. If the new players we sign, for instance, cost us 150 million, but the salary we're paying them over the next 5 years is £25 million a year cheaper, you're getting all that money back, and net spend doesn't factor that in. It doesn't factor in that some players bring you in more revenue organically outside of transfers. So when it comes to netting off what you've spent, the basic form that newspapers use for a long time, it doesn't give you the full picture, which is why I don't like using it as a measuring stick. It doesn't factor in agent fees, signing on fees. And the biggest example is Mbappe. Mbappe on net spend cost Real Madrid nothing. But in reality, he cost them hundreds of millions of pounds in signing on fees, agent fees, fees to his family. And of course, the bigger salary that he gets paid. And that's why the new cap actually is going to help make more sense, because people will just understand it as, well, you can spend up to 85% of your turnover. Yeah. So therefore, player sales go into your turnover. They're part of it. But what you can't, some clubs don't sell, and they should, by the way. Man United should develop a model where we make more money through selling players, but it's an area that United ignored for many years because our revenues from elsewhere were so high. So that's all the pushback I have on it. Really is.
I would say that in PSR, in a 3-year cycle, net spend can also just be helpful to clubs, simply because if you entered into a window feeling compliant in your last 3-year cycle and you get to a net spend zero in your transfer fees, then usually you will be confident that you'll be compliant in the next cycle. Now, yes, what you say is true, that regardless of that net spend, if you sell a player that was on £1 a week and you buy a player that's on £1 million a week, then that is also factored in. But I think because fees are such a big part and outlay, the net spend is still in some ways a useful metric. Firstly, because if you're back where you started fee-wise, then you know that you have a starting point to project if you are or aren't on track. And if you're better than where you started, then you're almost certainly going to be compliant unless you were already in hot water. And if you're worse than where you started, you might need to look at, have we got a new sponsorship deal, or can we reduce our wage bill? So it's still a very easy starting point for clubs as they budget and project to understand what they can and can't spend. But again, more important than that is that if you spend 50 million and bring in 50 million, it's not actually a zero for book purposes, because the 50 million that you bring in, you might be able to use as a quick fix annually on your books in order to actually
which I agree with,
book purpose profit and stay within the rules. And that other 50 million, you, if they sign a 5-year deal, can split. So it's 10 million, 10 million, 10 million, 10 million, 10 million. And that gives you more rope to work with and more time to work with. And the clubs that are amortizing are almost just delaying the payments because they've known intentionally that these rules are going to change. And now we head into the next financial year under the squad cost control measures. The clubs that have racked up high amortization, so would have been in trouble under PSR, will now have more ability to offset that by their revenue and stay within the financial rules. So it's almost like you delay your credit card debt long enough that your income allows you to pay off the credit card debt without being in hot water.
It makes absolute sense, which is, again, the guy come back there and said, so it is real, but just not a preferred method. Yes, in terms of assessing where a club is financially, you've got to do more than net spend. But of course, selling players for large amounts of money is a good thing for your club and should be celebrated. Ben, always.